I still remember the exact moment everything changed. Not just the day, not just the event, but the feeling. That strange.
Behind me, you can see the ongoing work to repair this vital crossing. I'm joined by Officer Smith and Mr. Jones to discuss the timeline.
Heavy feeling in your chest when something is wrong, before you even understand what it is. It wasn't gradual. There were no warning signs that felt urgent enough. No final notice. No last conversation. It was sudden, loud, and completely unexpected. That morning started like any other. The air was still, calm. The kind of quiet you only get out on open land, far from busy roads and crowded neighborhoods. The kind of silence I had grown used to over the years. But then, that silence broke. A deep, echoing noise rolled across my ranch. At first, it blended into the environment. My half-asleep mind tried to make sense of it. Thunder, maybe. That was my first thought. Storms sometimes rolled in unexpectedly, and the hills in the distance could carry sound in strange ways. But something didn't add up. The sky was clear. No clouds. No wind. Just that noise. Then it came again. Louder this time. Longer. More violent. Metal grinding against something. A sharp cracking sound that didn't belong in nature. The kind of sound that makes your body tense up without permission. I sat up in bed. Now I was fully awake. For a few seconds, I just listened. Trying to understand. Trying to place it. Maybe construction from the new development, I thought. They'd been working nonstop for months. Trucks, machines, workers moving in and out. But no, this was different. This wasn't distant. This was close. Too close. And then it hit me. That instinct. That quiet voice in the back of your mind that doesn't explain anything. It just tells you the truth. Something is wrong. I got up immediately. Didn't even bother fully getting dressed. Just grabbed my boots and stepped outside. The moment I opened the door, the sound hit harder. Louder. Clearer. Real. Engines roaring. Wood snapping. Metal tearing. And suddenly, my chest tightened. Because now I knew exactly where it was coming from. The river. The bridge. I didn't run right away. For a split second, I froze. Like my body didn't want to confirm what my mind was already starting to understand. But then I moved. Fast. I rushed across the yard, my boots barely on properly, my steps uneven but quick. Every second felt longer than it should have. And with every step closer to the river, the sounds became clearer, more aggressive, more destructive. And then, I saw it. My bridge. Or at least, what was left of it. For a moment, my brain couldn't process the image in front of me. It didn't make sense. It didn't feel real. Half of it was already gone. Gone. Just gone. Huge machines were parked right over it, their arms tearing through thick wooden beams like they were nothing more than sticks. Pieces of wood crashed into the water below, sending ripples across the river that reflected the morning light like nothing unusual was happening. Workers moved with purpose. No hesitation. No confusion. They weren't inspecting it. They weren't repairing it. They were destroying it. Completely. And standing just a few feet away from all of it was a man who didn't belong there. Clean clothes. Pressed shirt. Clipboard in hand. Calm. Too calm. He wasn't shouting orders. He wasn't rushing. He was just watching. Observing. Like this was all part of a plan that had already been approved, scheduled, and executed without a second thought. The HOA representative. And in that moment, everything clicked. This wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a quick conversation. This was deliberate. Every second of it. I shouted. Loud enough that my voice cut through the noise of the machines. Stop. What are you doing? A few workers looked at me. But they didn't stop. Not even for a second. That alone told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't something they were unsure about. They believed they had the authority. Or at least, they believed they were protected. I moved closer, stepping over debris, trying to get someone, anyone, to give me an answer. Who gave you permission? This is my property. Still nothing. No real response. Just a glance here and there, like I was an inconvenience, not the owner. Finally, one of the workers walked toward me. Not aggressively. Not apologetically either. Just routine. Like he'd done this before. He handed me a document. No explanation. No eye contact. Just paper. I looked at it. Words like emergency, structural instability, public safety risk. All the right phrases. All the official language. Designed to sound urgent. Designed to sound justified. Designed to end the conversation before it even begins. But as I stood there, holding that paper in my hands, I felt something else. Clarity. Because I knew my bridge. I knew every inch of it. I knew the wood, the structure, the reinforcements I had added over the years. I knew how it held up during storms, during floods, during heavy loads. I had taken care of it, maintained it, strengthened it. That bridge wasn't just functional. It was solid. There was no emergency. There was no sudden risk. This wasn't about safety. It never was. This was about control. And the more I stood there watching them tear it apart, the more everything from the past few months started making sense. Because this didn't start that morning. No. This started the moment that development showed up. Before that, my ranch was quiet, peaceful, isolated in the best possible way. It was land that had history, land that had been worked, lived on, respected. And at the edge of that land was the bridge, built by my father, not by contractors, not by some company, by his own hands. I still remember watching him work on it when I was younger, measuring, cutting, placing each beam carefully. He didn't build it to impress anyone. He built it because we needed it, and he built it to last. For decades, it stood exactly where it was supposed to. No problems, no complaints, until the development came. At first, it was just noise in the distance. Trucks, machines, workers moving in, then roads, then houses, then more houses, and before long, a full community. Perfect rows, clean designs, everything controlled. And with it, the HOA. At first, I didn't think much of them. We weren't part of the same system. I wasn't in their community. I had my land, they had theirs. Simple. Or at least, that's what I thought. The first letter came quietly, almost polite. They talked about visual harmony, about how my bridge didn't align with the aesthetic of their development. I remember reading it and just shaking my head. It sounded ridiculous. My bridge had been there longer than their entire project had existed. But I didn't respond. I didn't think I needed to. Then came the second letter. Different tone. More serious. Now they were talking about compliance, regulations, authority. That's when I paid attention. Because this wasn't about appearance anymore. This was about ownership. Or at least, their attempt to claim influence. I didn't ignore it after that. I gathered everything. Documents, property lines, legal records, anything that proved what I already knew. That bridge was mine. Fully. Legally. Without question. I even contacted a lawyer, just to be sure. And the answer was clear. They had no authority over my property. None. So we responded. Firmly. Clearly. We made it known that they had no right to interfere. And for a while, everything went quiet. No more letters. No more warnings. No more pressure. At the time, it felt like a win. Like they had backed off. But standing there, watching the last pieces of my bridge collapse into the river, I realized the truth. That silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. They weren't done. They were preparing. And this was their move. By the time the sun started to set that day, there was nothing left. No bridge. No structure. No connection. Just broken wood floating in the water and deep tire marks in the dirt where the machines had stood. And just like that, everything changed. I was cut off. Completely. No direct access to the main road. No easy way in or out. Simple trips turned into long, exhausting detours. What used to take minutes now took hours. And as I stood there, staring at the empty space where my bridge had been for decades, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that makes you react without thinking. No, this was something else. Something quieter, colder, more focused. Because in that moment, I understood something important. If they were willing to go this far, if they were willing to show up without warning, tear down my bridge, and walk away like it was nothing, then I couldn't afford to think small anymore. Because this wasn't just a disagreement. This wasn't just about a bridge. This was about power. And I had just been shown exactly how far they were willing to go to take it. So I made a decision. Right there. Standing at the edge of that river. Watching the last pieces of my past drift away in the water. I wasn't going to react. Not immediately. I wasn't going to shout louder. Or rush into a mistake. No. If I was going to respond, I was going to do it the right way. The smart way. The way they would never see coming. And that decision, that quiet, controlled decision, was the moment everything truly changed. For the next few days, I didn't react. Not publicly. Not emotionally. Not in any way they could see. And that was exactly what they expected. They were waiting for it. Waiting for me to panic. waiting for me to show up angry, shouting, demanding answers, maybe even threatening legal action right away. Because that's how most people respond when something is taken from them. Fast, emotional, predictable. But I didn't give them that. Instead, I went quiet. And in that silence, I started paying attention, really paying attention, not just to what had happened, but to everything around it. I spent hours just observing their development from a distance, watching how it functioned, how it moved, how it breathed. Because a place like that, no matter how perfect it looks on the outside, always has a system behind it. And every system has a weakness. At first, I just watched the basics. The roads, the layout, the positioning of houses, the direction traffic flowed in the mornings and evenings. Who left early? Who came back late? Where delivery trucks entered? Where they slowed down? Where they stopped? I didn't rush it. I let the information build naturally, day by day, pattern by pattern, and slowly, something started to stand out. At first, it was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Their entire neighborhood depended on one main access route. One, a narrow stretch of land that ran right along the edge of my property, near the river. It wasn't wide. It wasn't reinforced the way you'd expect for something so important. But it was enough. Enough to connect them to the outside world. Enough to make everything function smoothly. At a glance, it didn't look like much. Just another piece of land. Another part of the landscape. But the more I studied it, the more I understood what it really was. It wasn't just land. It was their lifeline. Everything depended on it. Commutes, deliveries, emergency access, daily routines. All of it flowed through that one narrow path. And without it, their entire system would struggle. Not collapse completely, but struggle enough to matter. That realization didn't hit me all at once. It built slowly, layer by layer, observation by observation, until finally, it became clear. That strip of land was their weak point. And once I understood that, that's when the idea began to form. Not suddenly, not like a flash of anger, but like a quiet calculation, a shift in perspective. If they could take away my access, then maybe I didn't need to rebuild mine right away. Maybe I could reshape theirs. But even as that thought crossed my mind, I didn't act on it immediately, because I knew something important. If I made even one mistake, everything could backfire. They would be waiting for that, waiting for me to cross a line, to act without thinking, to give them a reason to come after me legally. So I slowed down. Even more. I took that idea, and I tested it. From every angle. What was possible? What wasn't? What was legal? What could be challenged? I didn't rely on assumptions. I relied on facts. The first step was clear. I needed to know my land better than ever before. Not just generally, but precisely, down to the exact boundaries. Every inch. Every line. So I brought in professional surveyors. Not cheap ones. Not rushed work. The best I could find. I wanted absolute clarity. No mistakes. No overlaps. No gray areas. And I watched as they worked. Marking lines. Placing indicators. Mapping everything out in detail. When they were done, I had a complete picture. Clear. Accurate. Undeniable. And that picture confirmed something critical. Everything I was considering could be done entirely within my property. No encroachment. No violations. Just smart use of what was already mine. But that wasn't enough. Knowing boundaries was one thing. Changing land was another. So the next step was permits. And this was where most people would have failed. Because it's slow, frustrating, complicated. Environmental checks, land impact assessments, water flow analysis, regulations I hadn't even thought about before. But I didn't rush through it. I went step by step, filed everything properly, answered every question, waited when I had to, adjusted plans where necessary. Because I wasn't just trying to do something. I was trying to do it right. Legally. Completely. In a way that couldn't be undone with a simple complaint. And eventually, after all the waiting, all the approvals came through. Everything I needed was in place. That's when things shifted. Because planning is one thing. But execution, that's where it becomes real. I brought in equipment. Not all at once. Gradually. Excavators. Work crews. Materials. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would immediately draw attention. From a distance, it looked normal. Just routine ranch work. Digging. Moving soil. Adjusting terrain. People saw it. But they didn't question it. Because why would they? It was my land. I had every right to work on it. And that's what made it effective. Because while they weren't paying attention, I was already several steps ahead. I started near the river, carefully, deliberately, not making big changes all at once. Just small adjustments, widening certain sections, deepening others, guiding the natural flow of water in subtle ways. At first, it didn't look like much, even up close. But I knew what those small changes would lead to. Water is patient. It follows paths. It adapts. And if you guide it correctly, it does the work for you. Day by day, the land started responding. Areas that used to stay dry became damp, then soft, then unstable, and eventually submerged. It didn't happen overnight. And that was the point. Because sudden changes attract attention. Gradual ones blend in. Meanwhile, I kept watching, monitoring how their access point was reacting, how the ground near that narrow strip was changing, how close the water was getting. And slowly, very slowly, that strip began to shrink. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that would cause immediate panic, but enough to weaken it, enough to make it unreliable. Every move I made had a purpose. Every adjustment was calculated. I wasn't just digging holes or moving dirt. I was redesigning the terrain itself, shaping it, guiding it, transforming it into something new, something functional, something strategic, and most importantly, something they would never expect. Because from their perspective, nothing was happening. No confrontation, no reaction, no visible response to what they had done. Just a ranch owner, going about his business. But beneath that surface, everything was changing. The land, the water, the balance of control. And by the time they realized what was happening, it would already be too late. Because what I was building wasn't obvious. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was quiet, natural, and completely within my rights. A barrier, formed not by walls, but by the land itself. A shift in geography, a change in access, a line they wouldn't be able to cross the same way again. And as I stood there one evening, watching the water settle into its new path, seeing the land take its new shape, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge it. What had started as an idea was now real. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I wasn't just defending what was mine. I was changing the situation entirely, creating something that didn't exist before, something they hadn't planned for, something they couldn't easily undo. A natural barrier, a silent boundary, a moat. And the most powerful part of it all, they still had no idea what was coming. The moment it finally happened was almost quiet. No loud explosion, no dramatic reveal, no single moment where everything stopped and everyone instantly understood. Just a slow shift, a subtle change, the kind of change that doesn't announce itself, but once you notice it, you realize everything is different. It started early in the morning, the same way most days begin in a place like that. Routine, predictable. People waking up, getting ready for work, stepping into their cars, expecting the day to unfold exactly like every other day before it. Because why wouldn't they? From their perspective, nothing had changed. But that's the thing about real change. The most powerful kind happens before anyone notices it. The first few cars rolled out of the neighborhood like they always did. Engines starting, doors closing, tires rolling over the same path they had taken hundreds of times before. But within minutes, something felt off. At first, it was subtle. Drivers slowed down slightly. Not enough to cause concern. Just enough to feel different. The ground beneath their tires wasn't as firm as usual. The road felt narrower, softer, less reliable. Some probably assumed it was just weather damage. Maybe moisture from the river. Maybe poor maintenance. Nothing serious. Not yet. But as more cars followed, the problem became harder to ignore. One vehicle stopped. Then another. And then another. Because ahead of them, the path didn't look right anymore. The land that once felt solid now looked unstable. Edges that used to be clear now blended into water. And in certain sections, the road they depended on was simply gone, submerged, swallowed slowly by the water that had been quietly reshaping the land for weeks. Drivers stepped out of their cars, confused, looking around, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Some walked forward carefully, testing the ground with cautious steps. Others just stood there, staring, because this wasn't something you expect to see on an ordinary morning. Behind them, more cars started lining up, engines idling, people waiting. At first, it was just a delay. Then it became a problem. And then, it became something else entirely. Confusion turned into frustration. Frustration turned into tension. Voices got louder. People started asking questions. What's going on? Why is the road blocked? Who's responsible for this? And slowly, very slowly, the truth began to settle in. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The access they relied on was no longer reliable. In some areas, it was too weak to support vehicles. In others, it had disappeared completely underwater. And surrounding it all, water. On one side, on the other, closing in. Not violently, not suddenly, but permanently. And that's when the realization hit them. Their neighborhood wasn't fully connected anymore. The clean, perfect, controlled development they had built had become isolated, cut off, an island. And this time, they were the ones on the wrong side of it. There was no quick fix, no simple detour, no immediate solution, because what they were facing wasn't a temporary inconvenience. It was a structural change, a shift in the land itself. And land doesn't respond to frustration. It doesn't change back just because people demand it. It stays. It holds. It forces adaptation. And that's exactly what they weren't prepared for. It didn't take long before the situation escalated. Calls were made. Messages were sent. And within hours, the HOA got involved. But this time, everything about their approach was different. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the calm authority. Gone was the controlled tone of official letters and formal notices. What replaced it was urgency, frustration, and underneath it all, desperation. They showed up at my door later that day. Not casually, not politely, but with purpose. The same people who once sent letters questioning my bridge were now standing on my property, demanding answers, demanding explanations, demanding control. They accused me of interfering with access, of creating unsafe conditions, of intentionally disrupting their community. And I listened, quietly, the same way I had listened when they handed me that paper the day they destroyed my bridge. The same way I had stood there, watching them take something from me without hesitation. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I let them speak. Because this time, I had something they didn't expect. Proof. Not emotion. Not anger. Not assumptions. Facts. I stepped inside, brought out the documents, and placed them in front of them. The surveys. Every boundary clearly marked. Every line defined. Every inch accounted for. Then the permits. Official approvals. Signed. Verified. Legal. Then the environmental assessments. The planning documents. Everything. Every step of what I had done. Documented. Approved. Protected. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to explain much. Because the paperwork did it for me. The same way they had tried to use paperwork against me. The difference? Mine held up. Completely. There were no gaps. No shortcuts. No questionable decisions. Just a process done right. And as they flipped through those pages, I could see it. That shift. The moment they realized. They had no argument. No authority. No control over what I had done. Because I hadn't crossed any lines. I hadn't broken any rules. I had simply used my land. The way I was legally allowed to. And for the first time since this all began, they were the ones without leverage. They were the ones stuck. And not just in that conversation, but in reality. Because over the next few weeks, the situation didn't improve. It got worse. Much worse. Deliveries started getting delayed. Packages couldn't arrive on time. Suppliers had to find longer, more complicated routes, if they could find any at all. Emergency services faced challenges. Routes that used to be direct became unpredictable. Time increased. Risk increased. And in situations where every second matters, that's not something people can ignore. Daily commutes became exhausting. Residents had to leave earlier, return later, adjust their entire schedules. What used to be a smooth routine turned into daily frustration. And slowly, the pressure built. Not on me, on them. Because now, they were living the inconvenience they had forced on me. They were experiencing the same disruption, the same limitation, the same feeling of being cut off. And unlike before, they couldn't just ignore it. Eventually, they came back. But this time, there were no threats, no demands, no accusations, just a different tone. Calmer, measured, careful. They made an offer. Straightforward, clear. They would rebuild my bridge. Not just restore it, but improve it. Stronger materials, professional construction, fully compliant with every regulation they had once used against me. And they would cover the cost. All of it. In return, they asked for one thing, that I adjust part of the land. Not everything. Not a complete reversal. Just enough to restore stable access for their community. Enough to make their system functional again. And I considered it. Not emotionally. Not out of pride. But logically. Because at that point, the goal had already been achieved. This was never just about revenge. It was about balance. About making sure that what happened to me was understood, felt, respected. And now, that had happened. So I agreed. On my terms. Carefully. Clearly. And once the agreement was in place, work began again. This time, different. Controlled. Mutual. The land was adjusted where needed. Access was restored properly. And my bridge was rebuilt. Stronger than before. Better designed. More durable. More secure. And this time, untouchable. Because now, there was an understanding. No more letters. No more interference. No more quiet attempts to take control. Just boundaries. Clear. Respected. Permanent. And looking back at everything that happened, there's one thing that stands out more than anything else. It wasn't the destruction. It wasn't even the response. It was the approach. Because sometimes, the strongest move isn't reacting immediately. It's not raising your voice. It's not rushing into action. Sometimes, the strongest move is waiting, watching, understanding the situation completely, and then responding in a way that doesn't just answer the problem, but changes it entirely. They took my bridge without warning, without respect, without hesitation. So I didn't just rebuild it. I changed the situation. I reshaped the land. I shifted the balance. I made them experience what they had caused. And in the end, they didn't just fix what they broke. They made it better. Because they had no other choice. And that's the difference between reacting and responding the right way. Because when you do it right, you don't just solve the problem. You make sure it never happens again.